Thank you. Thank you very much. This has been similar presentation, similar to the examples we saw before. The presentation started with an analysis of economic history to understand the industry of silk in Sweden, in Stockholm, to better understand the set of the museum, which actually replicates one of the most outstanding factories. So again, history proves necessary not only inside the museum, but also externally to the museum to try and determine with an archive which reflects the evolution of the company. We were shown exceptional documents, exceptional books with very interesting samples too. Okay, we now have broader comparison, and it's now time for questions and answers. Professor Zhang. Una pregunta sobre la última ponencia y la manera en la que quizá usted haya mencionado y yo haya pasado por alto, lo cual lamento. No me ha quedado claro de dónde procedía el hilo de seda cuando se importaba, ¿no? En el que se importaba. He visto un cambio importante en 1850, ¿no? Hubo una transición. ¿Debido a problemas de importación, quizá? ¿O quizá con la crisis de la pebrina? ¿A qué se debió ese cambio? Gracias por la pregunta. Es una larga historia, si incluimos también la historia del siglo XVIII y cómo se ve afectada la industria de la seda con la crisis importante en el siglo XVIII en Suecia. En la fase mercantilista más activa, anterior a la crisis, las autoridades fuerzan a los actores a intentar refinar en la medida de lo posible y, por tanto, traen seda no refinada. Tras la crisis, cuando se da la bancarrota, se produce un cambio hacia la seda preparada. No soy un experto en seda, no recuerdo los nombres exactamente, pero ha sido estudiado en detalle una especie de materia primaria, materia prima, que queda registrado en los documentos, en los registros. Ese patrón se mantuvo a lo largo del siglo XIX. O sea que se siguió comprando seda lo más refinada posible para solo tener que tintarla y tejerla. En estos países la seda, bueno, básicamente el procedimiento principal es el tejido. Y con respecto a, bueno, en relación con la lana, por ejemplo, también se tuvo que crear un sistema de hilatura en el siglo XVIII y se contratan a hilanderas a pesar de que había un interés en importar hebra de lana. Era difícil de distribuir la lana, la hebra de la lana, pero pues se pueden establecer paralelismos con la seda. Gracias. Me gustaría añadir que en la medida en que podemos profundizar en los archivos de empresas privadas, que, bueno, desafortunadamente quedan muy pocos, dos de las principales firmas italianas especializadas en la hilatura de seda o en seda en bruto de alta calidad es Beguris en Bérgamo y también otra firma en la Toscana. Vendían prácticamente toda su producción al norte de Alemania. En la correspondencia que tenemos, en los registros, en los libros, en los archivos de Pisa, en un archivo concretamente, parece que se vendía al norte de Alemania y de allí el producto iba a algún otro lugar, lo que me hace suponer que quizá habría sido enviada a Suecia también. Muy interesante, gracias. Questions? I have a question to the professor. Do you know why in Sweden, in the silk industry, the payment term was so long? You mentioned something about 12 months. The raw material had to be paid in 3 months, but sales would be paid over a year. Do you know why? Why 12 months? Gracias por la pregunta. Muy interesante de la tensión de la tesorería, de la liquidez, con el debe y el haber, el deber y el haber, cuando se presta. Bueno, el periodo era fijo, iba de 9 a 12 meses, debido a la no existencia de instituciones crediticias. No había en ese momento bancos privados. De hecho, esto se está investigando hoy en día. Problema fue subrayado por las autoridades en el siglo XVIII. Bueno, Suecia, a pesar de su pequeño tamaño, es un país avanzado a nivel financiero, lo era. Ya había un banco central a finales del siglo XVII y había un fondo de manufactura. Minoristas que compraban el tejido, la seda, cobraban por anticipado y el banco asumía el riesgo. El problema era que el Estado financiaba a esos bancos. Entonces, el precio de la producción era el que se podía financiar con ese descuento, ese banco de descuento a la manufactura. Este tema se ha abordado a nivel historiográfico, duró durante mucho tiempo. Este sistema se inventa en 1700 y se hace muy importante a lo largo de la industrialización en 40, en los 50, en los 60, pero se abandona antes de 1870. Similar, el de la industria de la lana. En Yorkshire, donde hay sistemas diferentes para cubrir esos periodos crediticios necesarios para las pequeñas industrias o las pequeñas fábricas. En relación con estos aspectos financieros, hemos visto que en España no había cargos, no había impuestos. ¿Cómo se realizaba la fiscalidad en España? ¿Había un descuento similar en Suecia para promocionar la seda? ¿Podría usted repetir la pregunta? He pensado que usted hablaba en francés en un principio, entonces he intentado oír la traducción en español, que no entiendo el español. Estaba pensando en impuestos y la seda. Por ejemplo, la seda sueca tenía una menor fiscalidad o no. Era peor. Bueno, la historia es muy larga. Hablamos de leyes que ponen sanciones al consumo, prohibiciones al consumo, y no son aranceles sobre las importaciones. De hecho, estaba totalmente prohibido. Si importabas en aquellos años en los que el Estado era más activo, en ese periodo hasta 1830, hay cambios con cambios de poder en la sociedad, con una lucha, una competencia más liberal. Y es ahí cuando de vez en cuando se imponen impuestos sobre la seda y también sobre la seda producida en Suecia, pero el patrón general era incentivar y dar subsidios a la producción y sancionar la competencia por parte de calidades mucho más baratas y de mejor calidad del extranjero. El 25% al menos del consumo de seda específicamente era de contrabando. Esas son las estimaciones. Era una seda de contrabando, también procedente de Noruega. Pero bueno, antes era más un fenómeno del siglo XVIII. Pero la seda se prohíbe y, de hecho, algunos funcionarios se sorprenden del alto coste, difícil de obviar. Es difícil de entender cómo esas coaliciones lograban ser tan agresivas ya en la fase del proceso de liberalización. Tengo una pregunta para Sophie. ¿En qué año la producción de fibra en Francia entra en declive? ¿Fue un proceso gradual, lento? El fin de la producción. ¿En qué momento finaliza la producción de fibra en Francia? La hilatura y el bobinado de la seda. ¿Cuándo acaba el proceso? El problema es que tendría que pensarlo, tendría que pensar en la pregunta para darle una respuesta. Porque en cierto modo, en realidad nunca ha finalizado. esa producción. Pero bueno, quizá puedo pensarlo. Y bueno, no dejó de haber producción, pero a un nivel muy, muy mínimo. Y por supuesto el conocimiento sí que se preservó. Pero bueno, hablamos de una producción a minimísima escala. Pero bueno, no soy especialista y no puedo darle una fecha, un año exacto, ¿no?, de cuando cerró la última firma, la última empresa. ¿Nadie sabe nada de las torres que hemos visto, de esas torrecitas con esas celdas? ¿Alguien conoce una construcción semejante en otro lugar del mundo? Well, I think in Castile and in the center of Spain, there are similar towers, but they are pigeon holes, as you said, the only difference being the openings, as you said. So maybe they were pigeon holes or pigeon homes that were later turned into silkworm facilities. Well, I was told, but in underground facilities, well, I was told something about underground facilities, but I would like to ask you another question about the Museum of Lyon, which is definitely a point of reference for textiles, for the study of ancient fabrics and cloth. Apparently, it has been closed. No, it has been rescued. No, it will not close down. There's a new manager, a new director since October, and a new organization is being together involving the council, the Chamber of Commerce, the community. So I think they should have a new plan for 2019. It will not close down because a lot of people complained. They did not want the museum to close down. Well, some wanted it to fall apart, actually. Thank you. Good evening. I have a question to Sophie. Yes, the towers and the buildings. I know dry stone buildings, like the ones you showed, but they are used for cooling, for ice. The sales, are very surprising indeed, because there should be some openings for air to come in, and the towers you showed have no openings whatsoever. So I don't think it was used for either worms or pigeons. So I think it would be ice. Well, someone in the area told me they were for silk farming, for breeding the worms. Someone told me. So, well, tourists have an interest in silk farming and silkworms. Children like it, families like it. So there seems to be a bit of a boom. So we'll see. But I'm still trying to find. I know a few people I can write to in ADRAC. And I want to know what the specialists from the region think. Sorry, I didn't finish. I have another question. In your presentation, you showed us the Maison Rouge. There were some ceramic containers or vases, yellow ones. I've never seen them. What's their purpose? What are they used for? I wouldn't know. Javier, who collected those objects, well, he's been collecting all those objects for the past 50 years. Sorry, I'm not very knowledgeable about this. Prepared all these things very quickly, the survey very quickly, but I will inquire with the museum upon my return, and I will include it in the paper. Thank you. Because if it's a tailored container, it's well, in the region, some clay, which is used for pottery. I was not particularly surprised by these yellow pots because they are made with that local material or local clay, but maybe they were used for a different purpose. Thank you. Yes, I was surprised to see their shape. They're very awkward with 2 holes. The towers, one of those towers was next to a castle, am I right? No? No, they are isolated in the center of town. All right, so they're not connected to a castle or a center of power. No. And they date back to the 19th century? Well, apparently they date back to the 16th century. So I was told. Sorry, I thought I saw a castle next to them. So then I thought it would be for falconry or other animals, you know. Falcon nests. To breed falcons, maybe. Falconry and rear them or train them, which was an important practice at the time, one that brought a lot of revenue. No, well, there wasn't a castle next, but there was not a castle next to it or next to the towers. I showed the picture of a castle, and I showed a picture of the basement, the galleries, but it was not the towers that were next to. No, falcons, to breed falcons for falconry. Do you think they were used for that? But there's no light there. So they had to be enclosed, wouldn't they? And remember, on, over the little heads to train them. Sorry to interrupt, but I think, an answer cannot be easily drawn, sort of mystery, but, the author will certainly take into account your questions when she writes her report. The professor will first give an answer to that. Me gustaría simplemente darle las gracias al comité de parte del personal porque han enviado el jabón Ángel con las instrucciones. Se lo voy a dar al profesor Navarro, el jabón, y también a Ricard Huerta. Aquí está el jabón de seda, el producto más rentable. Muchísimas gracias. Muchas gracias. Vale. Mi pregunta para Sofía. Hay 20. En relación a los mapas. Ha sido interesante que ya en el siglo XIX pudiese hacer un mapa. Clunier, el autor de los mapas, era un geógrafo y el Ministerio de Agricultura en 1870-74 hizo un concurso aquellos que pudiesen hacer un mapa cartográfico donde con los sericícolas tenían un año para configurar ese mapa. Hubo muchas ese mapa en concreto porque los tres colores que utiliza son muy parecidos, los tonos son difíciles de distinguir. Pero él hace el mapa en base a estadísticas. Estadísticas. Hablando en inglés, ¿no? Well, the reason I'm saying this is because the map is really.
For instance, in UNESCO, we had difficulties map because the map of the Silk Road was stopped in Italy. And for instance, to include Valencia has been quite difficult. There are some global, and I think now that Sweden and has to do with real globalization. So that's why I'm so interested in this cartographer and how he could do that in that time. Well, back then, which is the 3 last decades of the 19th century, there was we have a movement that began in the 18th century in Great Britain. The British, when they were in India, they realized that there was lots and lots of silk, and they could take advantage of this silk because they couldn't have agriculture in Britain due to the weather. But they realized that in India, there were many kinds of silk. For instance, domestic, the Atticak, wild silk, and they began to make inventories. I can't remember the name, but the people from Lyon, they have this applications, and they begin to do the same with to take advantage of all the contacts they've made. And it's really interesting bibliography. There are many, many papers. They contacted information they could compile from the different countries where they. So they produce a huge number of articles, books, something like 866, I think. There was also a book from Nathalie Son-Rondeau, which is a compilation of everything known at the time, and it is very interesting because it talks about and it talks about the other half of silk that we haven't mentioned. And it is wild silk. Which is a lot of silk with even mori. As in Africa, South America, Argentina, coast of the United States, India. We haven't mentioned India so much. The Southeast Asia, even Japan. There's a production of wild silk. You can understand it. During the 20th century, they used this kind of wild silk, which is called tussac. Name for wild silk, and it doesn't take into account the moth that had produced this silk. When I was showing some station from Padova, Medici. They do not own the cocoon. They have collections of moths, and it's that we haven't considered because the industry or another quality which is very interesting, which is very bright, brighter than Bombis mori, but it's used with a low quality. Is China the one which is exporting this thread? The problem with those kind of silks is that quite often it's considered that is not continue. What I mean is that are too hard, they're difficult to extract, and then they use hard the thread a continuum way. They work the cocoons in silk in a non like, for instance, the thread of Kashmir, which is very fine, but it is not the from Bombis Mori, and that's how they use. Look at this quality way, but you go to India, in which they have lots, at least called sharp. It can be denominated as silk because it's considered of a quality. In shop, and I asked some Indian them, what's that? They say it's silk. For them, there's no difference. So I think that it is a problem of a vision, because we are looking at a Western point of view, but that product is also silk, and they have absolutely wonderful textiles with this material. So I would say that it is a problem of centrism, Europe-centrism. We have to take into account economically is as important as Bombis Mori silk. Recently, in the Indus Valley, they have found some fabrics of the third. So it is not a recent textile without a history. They do it because we were not interested in it. Really, this is really interesting. It's highly relevant because it tells us about the different perceptions we have about the quality of products, Eurocentrism, our look into the world. We could be talking about this for ages. Thank you very much for these comments, Dr. De Rosif, but I'm sorry, even though this is so interesting, now we have to proceed to the conclusions of the conference because we have a very tight schedule. So please, doctors who are here at the panel with me, I would like to close this session, and I would like to invite for the conclusion and the closing ceremony Mr. Vicente Genovés, José María Chiquillo, and Ricardo Huerta, please. We are going to proceed with the closing ceremony.